of my life I crown thee now, thine shall the glory be. Lest I forget thy thorn-crowned brow, lead me to Calvary. Lest I forget Gethsemane, lest I forget thine agony, lest I forget thy love for me, lead me to Calvary. Lest I forget you gave it all just to atone for Adam's fall. Lest I forget, lead me to Calvary. Show me the tomb where thou wast laid, tenderly mourned and wept.
Angels in robes of light arrayed guarded thee whilst thou slept.
May I be willing, Lord, to bear daily my cross for thee, even thy cup of grief to share. Thou hast borne all for me.
Lest I forget
The night spent in Gethsemane, your suffering and agony,
lest I forget
the love you showed for me, lead me to Calvary. Lest I forget you gave it all just to atone for Adam's fall. Lest I forget, lead me to Calvary. Calvary. Lead me to Calvary.
Thank you. Matthew 26. In 1978, in San Juan, Puerto Rico, the great Carl Walenda, circus performer, fell to his death. You can still watch it on YouTube. It's horrifying. He was trying to cross between two buildings 10 stories up, and the winds picked up off the ocean, and he lost his balance and fell. He had learned throughout his life to trust in his ability to cross over a tightrope. I think about what it takes to trust something. I know I wouldn't trust myself to do that. God created us with 5 senses, and throughout our lives we learned to use them to our advantage. You know, I can go in the fridge and open up a container and smell the chicken leftovers from last week, and just by smelling it, I know I shouldn't eat it. I don't trust it. I can hear someone speak and recognize by the vocalization in his words, he's not trustworthy. My senses help me do that. I can drive up to a rickety old bridge and think, I'm not going to drive my car over that. Of course, our senses can be tricked. Back in the Old Testament, that old story of Isaac and Jacob and Esau, and Jacob put on the skins of goats and smelled of clothes that smelled like the field and tricked his blind father into believing he was Esau so he would steal his brother's blessing. And he said, the voice is Jacob, but it smells and feels of Esau. Isaac thought it might be Jacob, but he trusted that his son was telling him the truth, even though he lied. Our senses can be tricked. Our ears can be fooled by auditory tricks. You know, scientists have discovered that people think eating yogurt from a white spoon is sweeter than eating the same yogurt from a black spoon. I can't see how that's possible, but it's repeatable. And scientists have put a person in a rubber arm, fitted them with a rubber arm, and had them hold their hand behind their back. They take a fork and stab the rubber arm, and the person cries out in pain. Now, how in the world does that work? Well, our senses are tricked. Back in 1997, at a Pokemon episode on television in Japan, 700 people went to the emergency room, mostly children, suffering headaches, nausea, and even epileptic seizures because of red and blue flashing lights. I was thinking, the police show up en masse at something, I could end up having a seizure because of all the lights. It can trigger photosensitive epilepsy. And as much as we're told in our culture to trust the scientists are figuring out how easy it is to trick people. I don't know that that's so good. And if you live long enough, you know that in the mid-20th century, scientists told farmers to return biosolids to the soil, but later science realized that doing this increased the spread of harmful chemicals in farmland. And I've certainly lived long enough to remember when butter was bad, and then good, and then bad, and then good. And I don't know where it is today, bad or good. I just prefer butter. And eggs, who knows? So what do we trust? Is there anything or anyone we can trust? Well, in 2020, Gallup released a poll where people indicated the professions and professionals they trusted. Nurses rated highest, 85%, which then makes me think 15% of you don't trust nurses. Only 20% trusted our nation's governors. Senators were worse, 13%. This one boggles the imagination. Engineers only get a 66% score. Who doesn't trust an engineer? He built that building. I'm not sure. He's an engineer after all. Police officers are only trusted by half the population, but if you get arrested by one and you have to hire a lawyer, the trust factor diminishes to 22%. Like the police, only half of the public trusts a college professor, but if he's teaching business and you become a banker, only 26% will trust you. How sad, only 40% trust clergy. And how is it in the world did I come under a dentist? He drills your teeth, folks. You're going to trust a guy who drills your teeth? We did beat out journalists. They're around 28%. So maybe meet the press ought to be meet the pastor, right? And of course, coming in last again, selling cars. 9% trust the car salesman. And I don't think car salesmen get a fair shake. The problem is you can't trust your dentist. It's not that you can't trust your dentist. I'm sure there are unscrupulous dentists out there, right? Just like I'm sure there are unscrupulous car salesmen out there. The problem is people have trust issues. That's really the problem. Trust issues are the underlying causes for a lot of our problems. Divorces, people who refuse to marry in the first place, business struggles, commitment. Some people don't trust airplanes, others don't trust boats. Oxford Dictionary defines trust as a firm belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something. I remember when my daughter was little, maybe 5 or 6, we were at a camp in Illinois, Camp Assurance. And I was speaking at the camp, and so the kids were enjoying all the things that you do at it's a little camp. And they had a zip line. It was kind of really popular about 20 years ago for camps to get zip lines. They had a zip line, and she got up and climbed up the stairs to the zip line and sat on the very edge with her little helmet on in her little harness, all connected to the zip line and refusing to budge. Would not budge. People are up walking around her, clipping on and going. And she's still sitting there, her little body, just looking out at the vast expanse of space in the, I don't know, 50 yards. That is the zip line. But just fear gripped her, an unwillingness to go. And the camp director tells her, we got to close. We've got dinner coming. This is it. You've got to go. She just didn't believe the reliability. She'd watch people go. She's seen them go. They're fine. They've come back healthy, all their limbs working, back up on the zip line, going again. She's still sitting there, clutched in fear. And at the very last moment, she finally let go and flew down the line. And of course, it snapped and she plunged to her death, right? We had 3 children. You didn't know of one, yeah. No, she loved it. And she wanted to go again. But the director was serious. This is it. This is the last time. It was the end of the activity. But while she was trying to climb back as fast as she could, he closed the zip line and disappeared. And she was really upset that she hadn't gone earlier. Trust issues. It's unfortunate there are people who once called themselves Christians who have trust issues of their own, but these are more serious. Their problem is not in trusting a zip line or whether to buy that new motorcycle. People who study this kind of trust problem call it deconversion, or the new term is deconstruction. The most well-known story is about a former pastor, a writer of a very popular book about 25 years ago named Joshua Harris. As a 21-year-old, he wrote the book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Harris didn't just quit, by the way. He became an active player for the other team. After his well-publicized divorce from his wife of 21 years and his rejection of Christianity, he developed a deconstruction course to help other people leave Christ too. Now, he's since taken that course down, but his drift away from Jesus continues. I don't know where you are right now, but maybe like Melanie on the edge of a zip line, you're staring into the apparent void of life, wondering, is it real or is it not real? And if you're lifting the lid on what you've always thought you believed, and it smells funny to you, if you're looking at your Bible and you see more of a rickety old bridge than a firm foundation, then I have something for you to trust. Whatever else you do, trust Jesus. You say, wait a minute, how can I trust Jesus? Well, throughout his life, Jesus demonstrated by his words and actions that he is eminently trustworthy. In fact, I would say that you may trust in people or human institutions or inventions. But if you have to choose just one thing to trust in Jesus. He's the one person fully worthy of our trust. He passes the dictionary test. He's reliable and he's true. And in the final hours of his life, once again, he demonstrated why so easily and confidently we can trust in him. Number 1, Jesus accurately predicted the courtroom scene against him. He correctly prophesied who his accusers would be. Verse 57, they that had laid hold on Jesus led him to Caiaphas. Now notice the people there. The high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. So Matthew identifies this group of people. We have priests. In fact, verse 59, we know there are other priests there, not just Caiaphas. We have the priests, we have the scribes, and we have the elders of Israel. This is the very group Jesus said would reject him and ultimately lead him to his murder. Mark 8:31, he says, I'll be rejected of the elders, the priests, and the scribes. Matthew notes this in chapter 20 and verse 18. And even there's an oblique reference to this in John 12 and John 18. Jesus clearly stated to his disciples long before he was tried and convicted and put to death that the priests, The elders and the scribes would be the ones who would accuse him. This is the Sanhedrin. Because they didn't require a quorum, only 23 members constituted a quorum. Most believed it was a small group of people who were there. In fact, some believe the Pharisees, who made up part of the Sanhedrin, were not even there. I doubt Joseph of Arimathea was there. He was a disciple of Jesus. Nicodemus was secretly a disciple of Jesus. I don't think he was there. And I really doubt Gamaliel was there. So maybe the Pharisees weren't there. But Jesus knew who they would be who would accuse him. In fact, he even knew Peter would be there. In verse 58, Peter followed him afar off to the high priest's palace and went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Peter follows. Boy, isn't that evidence of his life as a disciple? He's following Jesus. Not very well, but he's following. And he goes into the compound of Caiaphas' house. And John 18, verses 15 and 16 explain that John was able to enter and he was able to get Peter in through the servant girl at the door. But Peter follows afar off. Now remember, back in verse 35 of this same chapter in Matthew, Peter said, I'll even go and die with you. But he's following afar off, a terrible place for disciples to be. You know, the best place for you if you're a disciple of Jesus is as close to him as you can get. Always. Always. One scholar noted of Peter, he was midway between courage and cowardice. Just kind of right in between. Now, there's no doubt that Jesus had prior knowledge of his presence because of his prophecy about Peter back in verse 34 is then fully explained in Luke 22 when Jesus, under arrest, as Peter makes his final denial, it says in that courtyard, from one side of the courtyard to the other, Jesus turns and looks at Peter and they make eye contact. He knew Peter was there. And you think of the lesson here. Jesus knew how he would be received and followed through anyway. Think of the ways Jesus could have avoided this moment. He could have avoided going to Jerusalem in the first place. He didn't have to go there. He could have tried to make nice with the Jewish leaders. He could have bribed an official or two to get out of death. He could have fought back. Peter had a couple of swords. Fight back, scurry away in the night. But you see then, he wouldn't have been trustworthy. Everything about Jesus' life and ministry led him to this hour and to this conflict. He knew it, he foretold it, and he still walked through it. My friends, that's someone you can trust. Number two, not only did Jesus accurately predict the courtroom scene, but he followed that with a public confession about himself. This is point number two. He stated the truth about himself. He refused to answer the lies that others told about him. Verse 59, the chief priests and elders and the Sanhedrin, the council, sought false witnesses. They couldn't find any. Finally, two witnesses come in. Verse 61, they say, this fellow said, I'm able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days. And the high priest, he's really frustrated. Old Caiaphas, he can't figure out what to do, so he says, aren't you going to say anything? He just wants Jesus to slip up. But Jesus is refusing to lie. Notice, Matthew reveals the intent of the council. They have murder in their hearts. They're looking for false witnesses. This just screams of Ahab and Jezebel. That old story where Jezebel finds two witnesses against Naboth in order for Ahab to steal his vineyard. They secure these witnesses and they can't even figure out what to say. They can't agree among themselves. I find it interesting, by the way, all of this is contrast because there are witnesses of Jesus who could have been there, and who are they? Well, the disciples. They would have been great witnesses of Jesus. They could have told the Sanhedrin anything they wanted to know about Jesus. They're not there. Of course, these final two false witnesses refer to Jesus' statement about destroying the temple. John indicates he's talking about the temple of his body and raising it again in 3 days. Something that took place early in Jesus' ministry, and it makes me wonder if these people were part of the Sanhedrin, the Sadducees' employees, because all of that happened. That statement, I'll tear down this building, I'll build it in 3 days, occurs right after he cleanses the temple. So maybe in the aftermath of all the animals going out and the coins rattling around on the ground, and Jesus says, "You see the temple? I'm going to destroy it, and I'm going to build it back in 3 days." Maybe the people who are these witnesses against Jesus, maybe they were there that day and heard Jesus say that. But then it makes me think they're accurate, was bought off. These are employees testifying for their employers. The Sadducees were the ones who ran the money changing in the temple. They were paid informants. Well, here's the high priest so infuriated that Jesus refuses to defend himself that Caiaphas and Jesus now, it's so fascinating. They're on similar trajectories, aren't they? They both intend for Jesus to die on a cross. Caiaphas wants him to die because Caiaphas hates him. He wants Jesus convicted. But Jesus plans on being convicted. He's the worst defendant in history. He remains silent. He doesn't want to be convicted on a misunderstanding of his previous statement. These Jewish leaders thought the temple meant the physical building. Jesus is speaking about his body. He doesn't want some metaphor being the basis of his conviction and subsequent death. If he's convicted on that score, there might be confusion about the trial. There might be confusion about who Jesus is going through history. Some Jewish leaders apparently believed Jesus was threatening the temple. In fact, this is the accusation leveled against Stephen in Acts chapter 6. So what is the basis of their accusation? Jesus, letter B, publicly states his deity. The high priest, in the middle of verse 63, the high priest answered and said, "Okay, I adjure you, I command you by the Most High God, by the living God, are you the Christ? Are you the Messiah, the Son of God?" And Jesus said, "You said it." Yes, you said it. And then he says, "Nevertheless, I say to you something further. You will see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven." So here's the high priest questioning Jesus about his nature. And there's this formality of the charge. Are you the Messiah? Are you the Son of God? Then that question can't be refused. If Jesus refuses to answer the question, we may have a problem. So Jesus has been claiming to be this throughout the second half of his ministry. This is the confession of his disciples. His teaching had led people to know that this was his view, that he's the Messiah, that he was the Son of God. Even some of his parables had this in mind. Do you remember the parable where you've got the farmer and he lends it out to the itinerant farmers? They don't own the farm, but they work the farm. And then he sends one of his ambassadors back, one of his workers, and they treat him poorly. And then they send another one. And finally he says, "I'll send my son." And they murder the son and say, "We'll take the farm for ourselves." You know, Jesus is talking about himself. He's referring to himself as the son of the farmer. And the farmer in the story is clearly God. Jesus has been teaching this. The high priest is saying, "Who are you?" And now Jesus reveals it to him. He affirms his deity, as you've said, maybe a little cryptically, because maybe he didn't like the fact that Caiaphas takes an oath. "I adjure you by the Most High God." Maybe he doesn't like the oath that Caiaphas had said. Some people believe that was going on here, that Jesus, instead of just saying, "Yes, absolutely," says, "As you've said." But it's immaterial because then he turns the whole courtroom on its head. The phrase Jesus uses is not a prophetic statement about what they would actually see themselves. It's just stating that from this point forward, Jesus would be the one with all the power. I'm going to be in charge. And I think he's saying it almost this way: if you see me again, I won't be the one on trial. You will be. And the phrase expresses Jesus' right to rule as a judge. Now, Jesus passed the intense scrutiny of those who wanted to murder him for some years. They couldn't find anything worthy of putting him to death. He'd committed no crime, said no blasphemy. Sure, they hated him, but even with that strong emotional motivation, they had absolutely nothing. They couldn't put him to death. Think about it. What leader could have that kind of inspection? The bright lights that so often reveal the imperfections, even in the best of people. But there's nothing here. Nothing except truth. Jesus didn't die because he was a criminal. He didn't die because of some half-hatched political revolution, as some have supposed. He didn't die as an example for how we should do our own charitable work. He didn't die because he was misunderstood. He died because he said what was true about himself, true to his mission, true about how all of this would play out. Now, my friends, that's somebody you can trust. He doesn't back down. He doesn't step away. He doesn't obfuscate. He just says, this is who I am. I am the anointed one. I am the Son of God. Now, the trustworthiness of Jesus, demonstrated by his accurate prediction of his accusers, demonstrated in the truthful ways he speaks about himself. Finally, there's a final prophecy here. He accurately shows and prophesies how he will be treated. That's point 3. He accurately prophesied how he would be treated. He foretold the verdict against him. The priest, he hears Jesus say, as you've said, and this whole thing about coming in power, and he tears his clothes. He charges Jesus with blasphemy. Blasphemy. It's not blasphemy if he's right. High priest tears his clothes. He's feigning outrage at Jesus' words. But Jesus is telling the truth. And this forms the basis of the conviction that false witnesses have bungled the testimony. They blew it. They shouldn't get their money. They messed up. The charge is, you have heard the blasphemy. I want you to think about that charge for a moment. Just for a moment. Caiaphas is charging God with blasphemy. Now, for a moment, you think about that. And as you are, add this thought. Caiaphas has been thinking about that moment for a long time. He charged God with blasphemy. You know, Jesus has been saying about their religion that it's just fake. It's a coffin, beautiful and white, but inside are dead men's bones. He's been saying, this people, they honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Jesus has been revealing how weak and how false their faith was. Well, now he just points it out for all to see, for all eternity. And Caiaphas has all eternity in hell and later the lake of fire to think about the fact that he charged God with blasphemy. And then the council does the same. The 70, he is worthy of death. If Jesus is worthy of anything, it isn't death. If I was on trial, worthy of death. If you're on trial, worthy of death. Jesus is on trial. He's not worthy of death. Jesus is the Holy One, the spotless Lamb, the Son of God. Well, they convict him. And to compound their error, they begin to persecute him. This is letter B. Jesus not only told, not only told how he would be treated, right? And the verdict against him, but now he tells of his persecution by the Jews. Verse 67, they did spit in his face, buffeted him, smote him with the palms of their hands, saying, prophesy unto us, thou Messiah, thou Christ. Who is he who smote you? They began to abuse Jesus. You know, it's really interesting, human nature. Things have gone all the way back to the beginning. People are people. I don't know if you realize that. Cain and Abel were people. Cain and Abel have in them and in their hearts, and the people who came after them, the same kind of heart that you have in your body. Same kind of spirit, the same kind of mind, the same kind of sin problem. Adam's sin passed upon all men, for that all have sinned. We've all got the same thing. And though we have different degrees to which certain sins appeal and don't, some of us are more gossipy, some are more lusty. We understand all of that, right? And whatever sins I commit, those are the okay sins. And whatever sins you commit, those are the dirty, rotten sins. That's how we think, right? You understand that? I think we all understand. Since the beginning of time, it seems spitting on somebody has been viewed as a sign of gross disrespect. I mean, it is kind of gross to think about it, and I don't want to think about it too long. I don't know if you've ever had anybody spit on you. I've had somebody spit on me before. That's not fun. It's kind of grotesque. But Jesus told his disciples they would spit on him. He told they're going to show their contempt for me. They're going to show their hatred for me. And my friends, if Jesus came back in physical form and walked on this earth again, they would have the same disrespect for him today that they had then. They would spit on him now because they have no love for him now. The world hates him. They spit on him. They showed bared their soul and the evil in their own soul. I don't think people should spit on anybody. I don't think we should treat anybody that way. But how dark is the heart willing to do that against anyone, much less the Lord Jesus Christ? And then they punched him. The word buffet here means to strike with a closed fist. They punched him. Maybe we know from other gospel records that there are guards in the compound. They're standing there watching. Maybe they're the ones that arrested Jesus and brought him to Caiaphas. So maybe they're the ones now punching Jesus. Maybe it's the Sanhedrin. I don't know. It's not clear who's punching Jesus, but they're punching him. It's just, they now feel unrestrained. They now feel at liberty to play out the violence in their heart against the Lord. To just beat him. I'm just going to beat him up. And then they begin to prove to themselves that he was not the Messiah. Mark 14:65 gives us a little detail that Matthew doesn't give, but it's an important one. They blindfolded him first. So after they were tired of punching Jesus, they got out a blindfold, a cloth, and put it around his eyes. And then they began to slap him. It wasn't necessarily to hurt Jesus. Slapping somebody, unless you're really slapping hard, isn't going to hurt him. It's to mock him. So who hit you? Who slapped you? Who was it? Tell us. If you're the Messiah, prophesy to us, thou Christ. I find it interesting, by the way, that all the way through, all the way to the time up until his resurrection, these people are constantly asking Jesus to prove himself. Hadn't he proven himself? Did you hear that little thing about walking on water? Did you miss the whole Lazarus rising from the dead after a few days? The whole feeding a bunch of people on 2 different occasions? You missed all of that? I turned water into wine. You forgot? He had proven himself. Over and over again, he'd proven himself. But here we have Jesus finally being slapped. Prove yourself. And what they're proving is not Jesus. Jesus is not even interested in answering them. Every time one hits him on the face, they are only adding to their own damnation. Jesus now is revealing something about them. These people only saw what they wanted to see. Jesus had turned and said, "Yes, I know you," and began pointing out their names. Like he did when he brought the woman in adultery and he began writing on the ground, even though we're not sure what that was. What if Jesus had just stopped and been pointing out their names? Do you think they would have believed in him? Do you think that would have done it? No. They saw what they wanted to see. They heard what they wanted to hear. They had already rejected him in their hearts. They didn't want a God to rule them. They were godless people. The trappings of religion was for their own benefit, for their own well-being, for their own boost in fame or power or money. It wasn't about serving God at all. They had rejected Him completely. And in all of this, you know what Jesus is proving and demonstrating? He can be trusted. You can follow a person like this. A lot of people say they can be trusted until they experience a little pain. Trust me. It's pretty easy to say. Trust me. That's more difficult to live up to it when persecution starts. Jesus knew He would be humiliated in the worst possible ways. He knew He would be tortured to death. He knew what lay ahead of Him, but He did it anyway because He knew He was the only way that we could be rescued from the punishment that we deserve for our sin. Now that's somebody you can trust. He came to give His life for a ransom. He faced the barbarity of what that meant. He did not back down. I've heard other people talk about Carl Walenda. I don't know if this story is true. I'm going to tell you most of those illustration books are filled with stories, and I'm not sure even half of them are true. I've heard a story it's a really powerful story. It came out of a fictional book that somebody wrote in the early 20th century. Some preacher gave the fictional account. Somebody else heard it, passed it along, and before long, preachers were giving this, I've heard someone say, illustration. And you're always wary of those. So I'm a little wary of this story. I'm wary of it for two reasons. Here's Carl Walenda. He's standing there. I guess it's at Niagara. This is what I've heard. Maybe it was New York City. The place always changes. Again, a little suspect. But he's got himself a wheelbarrow and he's crossing over this wire back and forth. You heard this story? So you've heard this story, haven't you? You know what I'm talking about. You know this story. And after crossing over the wire a couple of times, he starts asking for people in the crowd, how many of you think I can do it again? Come get in the wheelbarrow. And there's a little boy there, and he says to the little boy, you want to get in the barrel? You think I can cross? I know you can cross, but I'm not getting in that barrel. And then, of course, the story is about faith. If you have faith, you get in the barrel. My friends, that's not faith. That's the other reason I'm wary of the story. It's just dead wrong. You get in a wheelbarrow of a man crossing over a high wire, you're an idiot. That's not faith, that's stupidity. I'm being serious. That would be really dumb to do, wouldn't it? Now, you might make it across, but then you might not. And what happens if you don't? You know, you get that fun ride all the way to the bottom until you hit the bottom, for there's like a half a second of whee, and then uh-oh. Do you know how many family members Carl Walenda lost in his life, in his circus life? 5. 5 of them died before him. In fact, there's a really famous story of they were in a circus, Ringling Brothers Circus, and they were doing their act, and it was called the High Flying Pyramid or something to this effect. You can look up pictures of this. There were the whole family. This is a family photo. They're in a pyramid form, sitting on boards while they're going across the high wire. I look at that and I break out in sweat. It's a little terrifying. Well, they fell, as you would expect at some point. They're going to fall. They fell. A couple of them died. One was paralyzed. Carl Walenda broke his pelvis. He didn't quit, though. I guess that's something. They tell the little boy, get in the barrel, and I'll take you across the wire. That's not faith. Do you know why it's not faith? Because Carl Walenda isn't God. But if God says get in the wheelbarrow, what do? If God says get out of the boat, walk on the water, what do? It isn't that hard. See, folks, I can't trust you and you can't trust me for salvation. I'm not going to do it. And I'm not going to trust another person or an institution or a church or this church or some action or activity that we do or a communion service or an Easter program or whatever. I'm not going to trust any of that for my salvation. There is only one person I'm going to trust, Jesus. That's it, Jesus. Because He is the only person worthy